All right, in this video, I'm going to give you my formula for painting a landscape that will literally save you years of learning. Welcome to Paint Coach. If you're new to the channel, my name is Chris Fornatero, and I help thousands of students every single month get better through my online courses and tutorials that simplify the oil painting process and get you having fun. Now, speaking of fun, landscapes are fun. And when I first started painting landscapes, I did not have fun. And I found it very hard to find any kind of like method or formula for going out and painting a landscape. All of the painters that I was following or taking courses online, none would actually give like a method or a formula. And I know a lot of people in the painting space say like, oh, you don't want formulaic painting. You don't want a formula that's, rigid and you don't want to be painting like someone else. I disagree. I think when you're starting out, it's better to have a process than no process, because at least with a process or a formula or a way of working, you can actually gain momentum and start seeing progress. Once you get the basics down and you know what you're doing, then you can like do your own thing or alter the process. I mean, even my process here, like I tweak it and do different things from painting to painting, but it's been so helpful for me to actually have like a series of steps to go through to get to a painting. And I really wish I would have done this years ago, because it would have saved me literally years figuring all this out. So I'm just going to show you what I do when I go through a landscape. And the first thing I do, like when I come across a scene that I like, the first thing I do is I ask myself, what do I like about the scene? Because it can get very overwhelming. Like there could be a lot of things that you like, but you stopped that scene for a reason. And so I think it's very helpful to first figure out why you stopped and why you like that scene, because your painting needs to be about something. And so for this photo, for instance, I really liked a few things. I liked the boat. So I'm like, all right, I like the boat. So chances are, I'm not going to make the boat this small on my canvas. I'm not going to like stand back far away and take a picture, even though I like its surroundings. Like I like this fisherman's dock, and there's a lot of cool things outside of this photo that were there. But I was like, all right, I like this boat. I also like this dock and its reflections because it is pointing to that boat that I really like. I'm always looking for lines in a landscape and where they're pointing. Another thing that this has are verticals in these posts on the dock. And verticals are tough to find in a landscape. It's easy to find horizontals, for instance, the horizon. You'll find horizontals pretty easily in a landscape. Verticals are harder to come by, so when you see them, try and hold on to them and incorporate them. And so I'm like, okay, I like this. I like this reflection that is really cool, so I can have that in there. The next thing I think about is, okay, what might be some problem areas in this scene? And the first thing is like, all right, this boat back here, there's a lot going on, there's windows and light and shadow and this awning, and it could take away from my boat here. And I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want things to get all complicated, in this area with these posts and everything. So I'm like, all right, well, I need to either get rid of it or paint it very simply. And you can see in my painting here, I did paint it very, very simply. I didn't put a whole lot of detail. I also kept the contrast of it very close together, meaning my darkest dark and my lightest light in it are not that different. Whereas in the boat, what ends up being my focal point, I made the lightest light and darkest dark very different and have higher contrast, so my eye goes there. Speaking of highest contrast, another problem area that I see is this dock, this bright dock right behind these dark posts. I'm like, okay, like if I paint this exactly how it is, this is going to be the main focus of attention because it's just high contrast. You got these dark posts, light dock behind it. I'm like, I think I can push this light dock into a mid-tone, which you can see is what I did here in the final painting. It's not nearly as bright as the brights in my boat. So those are like things that I'm worried about. I make sure I need to fix, and I'm going to fix those when it comes to values. So what I do is I try and then think about the scene in 3 values: dark, mid-tone, and light. Now, if you struggle with this, a thing that you can do is you can either put it in Photoshop and put in black and white and then use the cutout filter. If you can do it on your phone, there's an app called Value Study. You can just throw a photo into there and I'll show you what it looks like. It looks like this. And I got kind of lucky with this scene because I feel like there's not a ton I need to change. Like I like the value shapes that are happening here. The only things, again, I would change is I'd try and push this dock more to a mid-tone. Now, I don't have to make it the exact value of the water. I just need to make it close enough to the water that when I squint my eyes, I lose the dock in the water. Squinting your eyes, it's so simple, but it is like the number one thing that I rely on when I'm painting a landscape. When I'm painting it and I want to check to make sure the value's right, I step back and I squint my eyes and I'm like, all right, do I lose the dock into the water? It's like, yeah, I do. Okay. All right. It's the right value. I'd be careful back here with some of these lights in the boat. Same with the darks in the boat. Again, I wouldn't feel like I needed to make them super light, but maybe knock them down a little bit again. So if I squinted and looked at it, it's just going to get grouped as a midtone, but I could like keep it something like that. And then the light, the boat, I would probably try and lighten the shadowed side of the boat a bit, you know, still keeping it reading as in shadow, but just lighten it a little bit. And these light areas, maybe I'll pump that up a little bit here and then kind of push it, some of the stuff up here. So now it's very clear this is my focal point. And a thing that I'm looking for at this stage is I want it to be obvious which value takes up the most space and which value takes up the least space. So looking at this right here, it's pretty obvious what takes up the most space is the midtone. And then what takes up the least is the lights. Like that's good. If it was all equal and if it's hard to tell which takes up the most space, that means it's not going to be very dynamic. Now, speaking of dynamic, that's the next thing that I look for, and I do what I call my 4-quadrant test. This hasn't been peer reviewed. It's been working for me. I've been doing it for a few years and I find it helpful. I just divide my canvas up into 4 quadrants and I try to make sure there's dynamic balance. Now, if you're wondering what is dynamic balance, well, normal balance, if this was a scale, it'd be like this. Up there. Even. Dynamic balance would be this, big and small. I want the shapes in opposite quadrants to be different. So in this bottom left-hand quadrant, there's this big dark shape taking up a lot of space. So I want to make sure that in its opposite quadrant, the one in the top left or top right has darks, but a little bit of dark. And it does, this little window here, and maybe that. That's good. That's dynamic balance. Now I'm going to do it with the other opposite too. Got a good amount of darks here, not as much as down here, which is good. That's still dynamic going this way. But then it's opposite. I'm going to just pump that up a little bit dark here. It's still working. I got a good amount of dark here, a lot less over here. So it kind of passes the dynamic balance quadrant test. So once it does all that, I move on to doing a sketch. And all I'm doing in this sketch pretty much is just finalizing what I figured out before. And I got, you know, my dark here. I just use a blending stump and a pencil for the midtone and then erase the areas for the white. I make sure the dimensions of what I'm drawing is the same dimensions as the canvas I use. Even have my little grid lines here. That way when it comes time to paint, I just transfer this over. And this is what it looks like when I start to paint. The first thing I do is I transfer that value structure, that value map, with just thin brown paint. I tone my canvas with a wash of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, wipe with a paper towel. You can see my pencil grid lines there. I use that same brown mixture to block out with thin paint the darks. You can, if you want, use like a paper towel and wipe off paint for the lights if you want, if that helps you. I've done that before. And then when it comes time to color, I'm still thinking about this. I'm just plugging in color of big flat shapes in the same value structure. Now, this idea of working big flat shapes, I feel like is the most helpful way, especially for beginners, to start oil painting. In fact, I'm going to be teaching it during Paint Week, which is coming up soon. It is coming up September 16th and runs to the 21st. If you don't know what Paint Week is, it is a free online workshop that I do maybe 1 or 2 a year. And in it, I'm going to be talking about the big shapes method and teaching that, be walking you through a few paintings. If you want more information on that and to sign up, a link to do that is in the description of this video. But with the big shapes method, just blocking in these big shapes with color and the right value, at this point, the painting is there for you to lose. I feel like you've really locked in the most important parts of the painting. Now, something to take note at this stage is that when it comes time to blocking in the lights, you want to put in the darkest light that you can. Like you can see here, this boat's still relatively dark. It's not exactly popping as really light. That's because it's easier to build lighter paint on top of darker paint. So I always want to start with the darkest lights that I can. And as I go, I just want to make sure I don't like mess it up and paint stuff out of the values that I established here, or put in too much detail like this boat back here. I'm like really careful not to get too detailed in it. I don't want like a bunch of hard edges and high contrast. I'm constantly trying to dial in the value of that dock there to make sure it's light enough that it looks like the sun's hitting it, but dark enough that it's not drawing attention. As I'm adding in shapes and details and ripples in this water, I'm making sure that I'm making things too light or too dark. It'd be very easy to like make this down here, like get caught up in making all of this down here too light in the ripples, and now it's taken away from the boat. So I'm cautious of that. I'm also like playing and adjusting the values here, seeing how light I can make it while still getting this to read as in the shadow and the lights to be reading in the lights. And you can see by the final painting, like I've done that. I kept this neutralized. This boat in the back is really soft. Like I didn't worry about getting a ton of detail. The boat here is pretty light. You know, all of these are the lightest parts of the painting. I made sure not to get this too bright, and you know, turned out to be a good painting. And the cool thing is that with this like formula or this way of working, it's not like there's one right way to do it. It's not like there's only one right decision as you go through the process. Like I very well could have probably kept this darker and maybe even made this reflection read as a dark, and that could have worked. That's why a lot of landscape painters will have like one scene a lot of times like close to their house that they constantly go back to again and again and again to just try things out and to see how far they can push things. I didn't realize that for the longest time until I started following like, you know, a lot of painters on Instagram, and the ones I really liked, I felt like they definitely had a scene that they kept going back to, and I would see them paint the same scene a bunch of different ways. And that must make you very flexible as a painter and not rely on tricks and stuff like that, or just relying on making the same decisions. You can have a formula process for how you go about making decisions, but it's good to exercise your ability to make different decisions, you know, decisions that might not work. Try it out. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. So yeah, I hope you found this video helpful. Hopefully you can take this formula or this method, you know, whatever you want to call it, and use it as your own. And hopefully this just gives you some structure to your painting process. Because I know for me, for the longest time, I had no structure and I felt like I was just like flailing in the wind for so long. But over time, I've kind of developed a structure, and I feel like it's simple and very helpful to produce a good painting. If you liked this video, let me know in the comments section. This is a second video that I've made in like this format of going through these cliff notes of the tutorial, which, oh yeah, by the way, this is a Patreon tutorial. So if you want to see like the full video tutorial of this boat painting, it's on my Patreon page, which is also has a link to in the description of this video. All right, I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.